UPSA Podcast presenta Aprendiendo Juntos, un espacio para conversar de diversos temas con docentes de la U, expertos invitados y personalidades.
Bienvenidos a un nuevo capítulo de Aprendiendo Juntos, un podcast de la Universidad Privada de Santa Cruz de la Sierra. En esta ocasión me encuentro con el Dr. Stephen Hayes. El capítulo se realizará en inglés y si entran al canal de YouTube podrán tener los subtítulos a disposición. So, I'm here with Dr. Stephen Hayes, our special guest during the 20th conference of CLAMOC that is being held in Santa Cruz in Bolivia, gathering experts and students of evidence-based therapies from 20 countries. Dr. Stephen Hayes is the promoter and creator, I guess, originator of ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, and he is also fostering the process-based therapy. But I would like for him to introduce himself. And Stephen, thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
Well, I'm very pleased to. I mean, I have been a supporter of CLAMOC for a long time, and I'm married to a brasileira, so a gaúcha, and I come regularly to South America, and I know how important the development here is. So I'm pleased to be here. I'm a clinical psychologist who also studies how language and cognition works, because I became convinced long ago, I'm an old man, that how we think fundamentally alters how we interact with the world, and we needed principles to understand this, to understand emotion, attention, sense of self, and I've been able to popularize some methods and ways of thinking that appear to have considerable benefit to people, not just in mental health areas, but in behavioral health, challenges of physical disease, diet, exercise, things like that, and in social wellness and social justice areas. So I'm happy to be here and speaking with you. Thank you so much for your hospitality. It's been a wonderful experience to be in Bolivia and in your in Santa Cruz and with the hospitality of your university. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. It's good to have a positive feedback from you. I'm glad that everything is going well. So, you're a man of science, right? All your life has been dedicated to developing sciences. And I know that you've been key for the development of contextual sciences specifically. So, would you like to talk about this and share with the audience what?
Yes. Science is based on assumptions. All of our higher intellectual ideas have assumptions. It's been proven even mathematically, Gödel's theorem and so forth, that you can't have a symbolic system that doesn't start outside the system. You bring assumptions to it. So you need, philosophy of science is important to own, to notice, and to make coherent your assumptions. Most of us, if we're not examining it, look at the world with metaphors that we could understand even as children. People are like growing plants, or people are like machines, or, what's really important is to have a name for things. The wing that I come out of views it more this way. The common sense purposive act is the basic unit of my thinking, an act in context. For example, if you're going to the grocery store, there's a place you come from, there's a place you're going to, but that's nested in a larger set of things you're doing. Why are you going to the grocery store? Maybe you're going to have a dinner for your colleagues who are coming, and you're going to introduce them to your new wife. Okay, well then it's part of your relationship. It's part of your work, it's part of your career, it's part of your organization. And so it's even the smallest act is nested in larger and larger contexts. And how this applies to science is that it makes you very humble, because instead of having what we call capital T truth, I understand the model that applies to everything, which language lures us into. We say, no, we never can leave our own culture, our own stream, and stand aside as looking from Pluto back on our lives. We're living in and with our life as it develops. And what we want from science is help in accomplishing the goals that we have that are practical, ultimately. And so, yes, basic science is very important. I do basic science, but ultimately, knowledge has a purpose. And what contextualism asks you to do is own your purpose, and then use the ways of thinking that foster that. Now, when you apply that to clinical work or practical work with mental health, for example, you ask people to look at what's most helpful about their thinking and feeling and remembering, and to not try to get rid of their history. Their history is their source of wisdom, but find a way to channel that history in ways that open up new possibilities and that foster the journey they're on as defined by the purpose of that. What do you want your life to be about? You're only going to live for a certain period of time. What do you want to stand for? What do you want to bring into the world? I don't mean just your goals. I mean the qualities of being and doing that you reflect. And if you think of the people who are heroes, people in your life that you look up to, I can guarantee you that you look up to them because they represent values that you wish you had, or that you want to put into your life, that you aspire to. That's why they're your heroes. It's not because of how much money they have, what car they drive, very trivial things. If you just look at the people who really moved you and lifted you up in the world, it's not about these superficial things. So can we create a psychology that is more adequate to these challenges of the human condition? And you have to, with assumptions, place your bets. And if you think, no, I need to simply name everything, like in personality theory, or no, I need to understand that maybe you're like a clock or a computer, and I need to understand all the parts and how they fit together. Very common metaphor. That's fine, that's great, but it's a different set of assumptions. And one nice thing about the contextualistic world is that we can be held to account to the practical accomplishments that we aspire to. And in many areas of science, they say, well, it's not so practical now, but when I understand it, then it will be very practical. Just give me more support, build a university, give me a grant, pay my salary. Eventually it'll be important. I'll really understand. And sometimes we wait for generations, and still nothing comes. And I'm not criticizing it, because that would just be taking my assumptions and looking at their assumptions, and it's very childish. It's like the games we played as young children when we go, na 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 na, you know. This isn't something adults should be doing, but it is something that politicians and funders and citizens who, after all, pay the taxes, that pay the salaries, that build the buildings, or make the contributions, that and pay the tuition. And I think the citizens of the world have a right to understand and be told in simple language, what game are you playing? And I can tell you the game we're playing is learning how to predict and change the important things that concern human beings. And that's the game I've been playing for 45 years. I just retired in July, but I'm working harder than ever, as you know. And if people look and say, well, show me that it's useful. I hope now, and I here in my talks told people about some of the things that, for example, the World Health Organization distributes my methods around the world for victims of war. And it's the only thing that they have widely distributed for that problem. You can look on the television and know how much of a problem that is, how much suffering in the world that's created by war. It's just an example. I'm proud of it. Excuse the self-praise. Yeah. I'm an old man. If there's ever a time...
You've done something to be proud. Just
yeah, if there's ever a time.
Don't worry.
But I think we can still be self-critical. Yeah. And in some of the things I was talking about here, I was talking about the new things we're doing, some of which are showing the flaws in our previous thinking, including my own. So that's the journey that we're on.
I love this phrase of science. What we are looking from science is to get help, right? Because it's a short phrase with a really deep meaning, focused on people, focused on quality of life, focused on finding our own, I don't know if finding or building our own pathway, understanding that my own pathway is not the same that yours, but we can share some common things. So that phrase is stuck in my head still.
Very good.
In general, we are still talking about how people react, behave, make decisions, and all that stuff, but we are really, really trying to have a deep understanding of it, but also recognizing our limitations for it, right? Based on this, you've developed acceptance and commitment. And one of the things that comes to my mind is remembering people saying something like, everyone is talking about acceptance, but what do we do? What is after accepting things? Yeah. So would you care to explain?
Well, acceptance is one of those words that can mean different things, and it's important to do enough of a dive that you understand what we're talking about. When ACT first became popular, when I wrote a self-help book called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, it's available in Spanish. People may know the book. Okay. And it was written up in Time magazine, which is a major, or at least was at the time, this is 2006, a major magazine in the United States, and a 5-page story, including 2 pages with my big face, which I sent to my mother. But when it became popular, immediately there was like, oh, you are just an upper-class privileged person who say that you should accept your lot. And no, quite the opposite. And fortunately already, although we'd only done a few studies at that time, I think 4 randomized trials. Randomized trials are ways that you challenge yourself statistically to show that your methods are useful. There's now more than 1,000, almost 1,200 randomized trials on ACT, but at the time there were 4 when I published this book. Fortunately, one of them, not my study, was done by Frank Bond and a colleague of his, had entered into a workplace and used my methods to deal with the stress of being workers there. They were bank workers, and they were in a call center. So they had to call people from morning to night saying, you're not paying your bills. Your loan is overdue. You can imagine what an awful job this must be. People hang up at you, they curse you, they are not happy to receive this phone call.
And then to the next call, because you have to keep, or they have to keep doing their jobs.
Yes, and then there's the next call, and the next call, and the next call is very stressful. Well, there had been a previous method that had shown that you may be able to help by teaching people to change things in their workplace that would make their workplace less stressful. So that was the comparison condition. And then there was a control group that was just a wait list and was watched. Well, with the ACT methods, people's stress went down very notably. With changing your workplace, no. The control group didn't change, maybe got a little worse. But if you looked at, did you innovate things at your work? Did you change things? At POST, the one where people were taught to change their work environment, didn't reduce stress, but it did get people to start demanding changes. In an ACT approach at POST, no, but at follow-up, yes, even higher than the condition, even though it wasn't in the protocol at all. Why? Because it was in the values of the workers. It was in what they wanted their work life to be, and the barriers that kept them from talking to the foreman and saying, why are we doing it this way? And we need a break, and, you know, the little things at work that make a difference. Often it's emotional barriers. I'm afraid. Maybe I'll be criticized. Maybe they won't want this feedback. Maybe it's not safe. Maybe they might fire me. Maybe another worker will think I'm being, as we say in English, too big for my pants. Yeah? Well, ACT was all about that, emotional and cognitive openness, coming into the present moment consciously, focusing on your values and creating habits around them, learning how to be more open, aware, and actively engaged in the kind of life you want to live. So I was able to respond to the early critics and say, that word acceptance doesn't mean tolerance or resignation. It doesn't mean accepting your lot or giving up. It means, from the original Latin, septere is a word that meant to receive, as if to receive a gift. And it's still in English. I don't know if it's something like this in Spanish.
It's pretty similar. Aceptación.
If you have something very precious that you're giving to somebody, like your grandmother's ring, and you're going to give it to your bride-to-be, you might say, here, would you accept this? You don't mean, would you put up with this? Would you resign yourself to receive it? You don't mean, would you accept your lot and take the ring? No, you're asking a willing embrace. It's not enough just to give. There's also the action of receiving, and you're asking for that. Yeah? Well, acceptance and commitment therapy is like that. Could we reach out and take willingly what our history offers? Why? Because it's the source of our wisdom. Now, it's a strange gift. Sometimes these gifts are painful. But if you think of the important events in your life, just think of the ones that really changed your life, that moved you, that you learned from, that you grew from, I bet you there's painful ones there. It was only 2 years ago I had my hand on my brother, who had walked in with a stomach ache 24 hours earlier to the hospital. And I had my hand on him when he took his last breath. In less than a day, he had such massive cancer that he didn't know he had, that his colon collapsed, his system broke down, and he died. I was so thankful to be there. I was traveling across country when I got the notice from my sister-in-law, and I drove like a maniac to be there. And because this is sacred space, yeah? Is that painful? Yes, that's painful.
Well,
but wouldn't you do that? Many people listening to me have been through such experiences. And if I said, you can only say good or bad, happy, they'll say good. Sad, they'll say bad. I say, wait a minute. How about that very, very sad thing that happened to you that you embraced because it was so precious? When you went to the funeral, or you were there when somebody close to you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the brain has a way of thinking that can be very stupid because it's allowed this new property of human language that is only maybe a couple million years old. Learning by experience is 500 million years old. How do we know that? Every creature since the Cambrian, which is 545 million years ago, 500 million years, learns by experience through conditioning, classical conditioning like Pavlov's dogs, for example. If you're a slime mold, no, you don't learn by this. That was before the Cambrian. If you're a spider, yes, you learn by this. So does every other creature that evolved since then. So what's happened is that this new kid on the block, where you learn something in one direction and you drive it in two, and it changes your world. If I say to a 16-month-old, this is a cup, yeah? And I do it several times. I show it, this is a cup. And now I say, where's the cup? The baby will try to find the cup.
Yeah.
Already at 16 months. If that baby doesn't do that, and if it's not corrected, baby will not develop normal human language. It begins with something that simple. We're the only creature that does that. Your dog doesn't do it. Your cat doesn't do it. The language-trained chimps don't do it in controlled research. So far, we're the only ones. And from that, it isn't just this is. Children begin to learn by hearing an unfamiliar word. They look around, they know the names of everything, but maybe not that. If I say, where's the metronome? And there's a metronome, you know, the thing that times like in a piano, nearby, the baby will learn just by the fact this is an unfamiliar word, and that's an unfamiliar object, to derive a two-way relationship. And they'll begin to say the name or know the name. And you can say, where's the metronome? If you've had children, you've been shocked by this because they hit that point of rapid language development. And you, where is this coming from? I'm not teaching it. They're watching. They're listening. And soon enough, you know, it isn't just is and is not or opposite. It's also better and worse and before and after. And let me give you an example. In your coinage in Bolivia, do you have coins that are smaller but are worth more than coins that are bigger?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. We do, actually.
Okay. Well, young children have a very hard time with that. When they're 3 years old, they want the big coin.
Of course.
Because they know they can buy candy or something. Yeah, they want the big one. When they're 4 or 5, they want the bigger one, meaning value, arbitrary value, just because we say so. We as a culture say that one's worth more. Well, if you can do that with coinage, you can do it with your own life, and you can do things like this. Yes, I have many things, but I wish I had more. That person has more than me. Oh. There was a movie about J.P. Morgan, the billionaire, a few years ago, who was so grasping and greedy in his life. And in the movie, somebody asks him, what is it going to take for you to be happy? And he says, more. There are billionaires who are miserable.
What a relative term.
Yes, exactly.
More never ends.
This is my point. So the human mind can torture you, even if you have everything. You have food, you have a house, you have people who love you. every day there's people who kill themselves with all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so my point is that we're on a very interesting and difficult journey, and learning how to open up to our own history, our own emotions, our thoughts. And this, use science to understand why it's so hard to be human. It's hard to be human. And we're doing better in many areas culturally. But in the one area that we're not doing better is in human happiness. And I think it's because we've done very unwise things about how to rein in
Mm-hmm.
the excesses of the human mind, and to empower us in a way that in our culture, our wisdom traditions, our religious traditions, our wiser traditions used to be central. Now that's beginning to weaken and fall away. And we're getting crass commercialism.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the right house, the right car, the right beer, the right clothes, the right brand, you know, this is more. And people are miserable, but they don't know how to find their center. So psychology has to be of help, in part because we've done such a poor job historically. We are part of the reason why it's so difficult. And we're not going to solve these problems that we face worldwide just with engineers and physical sciences. We're going to need the behavioral sciences too.
Wow. It's amazing how you manage to explain things that are complex, not necessarily complicated, but complex, with really specific examples.
Yeah.
And I understand that contextual sciences, from what we were talking before, meeting behavior and decision making, generating experiences, any kind of experience. You were talking about the experience with your brother, which, by the way, I'm really sorry, but I could feel as well how important it was for you, and how you are transforming this experience to something greater, because it matters, right? And then you used one word that is empowering.
Yes.
Empowering people to make changes, not only for themselves, but for the context and the society, and all this stuff. And then I started thinking of all the experiences that we are going through right now, worldwide. Such a variety of experience. I couldn't imagine all of them, of course. But I started thinking of social conflicts, war, integration, intercultural goals, climate change. And all of them probably have a bit of pain, or a lot of pain, for people, but also other kind of experiences, or I don't know. What do you think about all these challenges that we have for this century?
Well, the core of a contextual position is to think of, as I say, the act in context, which is to look at our history of how we interact with the world, and leads from one situation to another. But it's nested in levels. We have multiple levels within this. We have our bodies and the parts of us that relate. We're an ecosystem. We have more cells in your body that are not human than cells that are human, in your gut biome and so forth, vastly more. You have the whole organism with your history. But we're also social beings. We're the social primates, vastly more social than any other primate, 100 times more cooperative than chimpanzees. And indeed, that's why we learned cup, because the social primates, many animals have names for things. And many animals, when they hear or see signs of names, they respond. A prairie dog, I don't know what it's in Spanish, but the little dogs that have hidey holes and dens, they're out in the prairies, they see an eagle, which is their enemy, they squeak, and all the prairie dogs run to the hidey hole. The one who made the squeak, the parts of their brain that light up when they saw the eagle is different than the parts of the brain that light up when you hear the squeak and run. That's not true in humans. Our communication systems are integrated. We're speaking and listening. But it started socially. It started more like prairie dogs because we were so social. Do you know that even babies, before they have any language at all, will reward cooperation and recognize it? If you take a 6-month-old baby, they don't speak a single word, and you have a mean puppet and a nice puppet, and they interact. And then let's say that baby in their high chair has some precious things that they like to eat. I have a picture of this study that was done where the baby has Honey Nut Cheerios, little round oat cereal, but sugary, very good, and it was her special treat. And the mean puppet comes and wants some. The baby won't give it any. The nice puppet comes, they will give away their Cheerio, meaning it's gone. I've given it away. My point being, we are so social that we are meant to be cooperative. Our language, I believe, this two-way street, is a social invention. It started socially, and then we learned to integrate it. There's even clear recognition in the early written history of language that people would hear their thoughts almost like voices. You know, the oracles of Delphi in Greece, nobody said, you must be crazy, you're hearing voices. Everybody was hearing voices. We've become more integrated. You hear voices too. Yeah. You argue in your head.
All the time, don't worry.
You argue in your head. You know, little children will understand watching a Disney cartoon, Goofy with a halo, Goofy with horns, and they argue. 4-year-olds will understand that because they're already arguing in their head. Well, when we scale from to the psychological level, although it came socially, we can easily slip into a thing where this level, it's nested in this larger level, is built around selfish purposes. That's true even in your body. You have nucleated cells in your body, eukaryotic cells. You have mitochondria in those cells. If you didn't, you wouldn't have the energy to do what you do. We say it's the energy of the cell, yeah? It has different DNA. It's not the same life form.
Okay.
That's why when you do the little swabs and figure out where you came from, the maternal DNA will say where you came from because it's the mitochondrial DNA that they're looking at. It's different. Do you know that in plants, mitochondria will trick the plants to only have female plants? That's called male cytoplasmic sterility.
Okay. Wow. No,
and
I
it's
didn't
not
know
good
that.
for the plants because sexual reproduction in plants produces DNA variation that allows you to respond as a species of plant to changes in the environment. But mitochondria can be selfish. I just want more of me. So I'll trick the cell into only having things that will replicate my DNA, not those male interactions. Well, you have something similar in your body. You have precancerous cells right now. Many, 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 many. Some of them could become cancerous. And what is that? It's one cell saying, I want more of me. Well, then you have a tumor. And why does the body not die? Because the body has a system. If you're being selfish, I'm going to try to correct the DNA or repair it. If I can't repair it, I am going to kill you. Your immune system, macrophages come and kill the cancerous cells. And if they fail, you may die as a whole human being, because one cell decided to be selfish and they got away with it. Now, as you expand these problems that are social, what we need to remember is every level of organization is challenged in the same way. So what is healthy for you in terms of being orienting towards what's important and moving towards it, if you don't also consider the levels of organization above you, it may create a problem. So, for example, psychologists are putting self-compassion into the world, self-kindness, self-acceptance, because there's a lot of data showing that that's usually helpful. Because of the way we do our studies, unfortunately, we've been fooled into thinking that almost always, if you're kind to yourself, you're kind to others. Well, 9 times out of 10, that's true. But if you do the analyses correctly, there's a thing called selfish self-compassion.
Okay.
And you know people like this. I have to do my bubble bath. It's self-care. You take care of the kids. It's not my turn. I need my self-care. What?
It's
Really?
In the name of self-compassion.
In the name of self-compassion. No. Yes. Now look, what's going to happen in that marital relationship? It's threatened.
Yeah.
And if you look at marital happiness and satisfaction, if both partners start playing this selfish self-compassion game, we just published a recent study showing that the desynchronies in self-compassion leading to compassion towards others, the desynchrony predicts social misery in relationships. We've been able to then take a peek at what happens at a higher level, let's say in your work environment, where you may have a department you work in, or a clinic that you work in, or there's a team.
Mm-hmm.
And for the team to work, people have different roles, and they need to work together. Yeah, but the same thing happens at that level, at the level of your neighborhood, at the level of your city, at the level of your country, at the level of your continent, at the level of the world. What has happened in recent times is that we now no longer can rely on cultural processes that reined in selfishness at these higher levels, because the interests of commercial organizations, which have brought a great deal of prosperity to the world. Yes, but they've also brought cigarette smoking and cancer where they knew for half a century that they were doing it, and they hid the evidence. They've also bought big pharma, giving you medications that once you start using, you can't stop, and produce side effects that they know are harmful, but they hide the data. They've also produced big oil, which is only too happy to kill the electric cars that we were working on 40 and 50 years ago, that only now are we finally saying, okay, we can make them, and probably more cheaply, only a quarter of the moving parts. They don't break down. Yeah, but what if you make your money by fixing the cars and selling the parts and making sure there's a big markup if you get parts from a genuine Ford dealer or whatever. Yeah, they all have an interest. Big oil has an interest. They knew. My first book was on environmental problems. It's called Environmental Problems, Behavioral Solutions. I was an environmentalist, even though I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and they thankfully let me do it, let me pursue my dreams, because I was an environmental activist before I became a psychologist. And I was there at the first Earth Day and so forth. We knew this day was coming 50 years ago. I wrote a book about it in 1980. That's 44 years ago. And could we get attention to what needed to be done? No, because at these higher levels, there were interests that were selfish at that level. Now, the point is not to blame the individuals who are in these systems. The point is to think of our job as behavioral scientists to understand these acts in context at all levels of organization, and to do it very humbly. Social engineering, as there's hardly any data that are really good, but through experimentation, when the politicians, when you're lucky enough to have politicians who are more controlled by the people than by the selfish interests of particular organizations, we can work together, and there's examples of it. I'll give you an example. Norway has taken its oil money and invested it in a huge effort that's controlled by the citizens. It makes them so much money that taxes are very low. But what are they investing in? Well, they will have, they're already about 85% of their new cars are all electric. Not hybrids, all electric. Today, something like 80% of their, or 90% of their energy in Norway comes from the sun and wind. Today. They're showing the world there's a way forward. It's cheaper. It's good for the environment. Their air is very clean. Now, it's hard to replicate Norway.
Yeah.
They have a very communitarian society. Why? In part because in very cold areas, if you don't cooperate, you die. And they have things, if you visit Sweden, let's say, they have a thing called every man's right. What it means is you are free to hunt and fish and camp on any land, as long as you don't get too close to a house and look in their windows. You can't stay there for weeks, but you can stay there for a couple days. It's any man's right. Should be any person's right, of course, but the gender bias was built in. My point being, there are examples in all of our countries and cultures of cooperation at the highest level, done by means, faith traditions, for example, cultural traditions that are deeply ingrained, rituals, educational traditions. And the modern world has been ripping and tearing at these things. The groups are breaking down because, ironically, you can leave a group easily and you can enter a group easily. You can take your phone.
Oh,
You want to be in a group
kind of groups.
that is organized around some crazy idea with people around the world? You want to be a Nazi? You can be a Nazi. You can find the people who will quote Hitler, who will share his beliefs. So, coming back to your question, I think what we're going to need is a wiser behavioral science that humbly but vigorously pursues how to understand human action and rein in selfishness at all levels so that we can create a values-based world. And that will require real changes. And I look forward to the day that when you have a television show about climate change, there'll be a psychologist there. And that person will not just be talking about depression or distress about climate, but we'll be talking about human behavior and how it needs to change in order for us to create a world that's sustainable. Because if we don't do the math in the equatorial regions and Bolivia as parts of this country, if we keep doing what we're doing, 100 years from now you won't be able to live there. It'll be impossible. Already you can do the math and see what's coming. So it's time for us to wake up. Sorry for such a long answer. But let's use this language tool that we have to create new ways of evolving a culture that are more driven by values and data, are more open and transparent, everybody can see, and that it's our job to create modern minds for this modern world that allows us to evolve on purpose. And it will take all of us and a lot of humility, but it'll take a big change in the behavioral sciences. We can't just rely on physical sciences to save us.
Wow, Steve, unbelievable. It's clear. It's a clear message for cooperation and for keep on improving as societies, but starting at an individual level, because change starts with oneself, right?
Yes.
That's
from the individual to the group.
To the group.
But at each level, new ways to empower that level to be on a values-based instead of selfish journey.
Amazing, amazing. Steve, thank you very much. We have just hit 45 minutes. This is amazing. I know that we could spend days talking about this with different topics. I want to express our gratitude to you for accepting coming here to Bolivia, to Santa Cruz, to our university, accepting discussing some of these topics that are that important for us as societies. And let's hope that this is the beginning of greater things. Well, you have started 45 years ago, but there are a lot of people that are following these ideas. No, following and questioning and criticizing and exploring. So
following
thank you very much.
Is not the right word. And if I could conclude with just a brief statement. The reason that I came here, in addition to having family and having married 2 Latinas, and I have a son with a Brazilian passport, dual citizenship. I feel as though my family is integrated with the South American community. I believe that the future is going to have to be driven much less by the Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, we'll see, countries, and much more by lower and middle income countries. Because what we need is a science that starts one person at a time, then scales to the group, and scales to the group, and scales to the group. And frankly, in the rich countries, we've evolved ways of thinking scientifically that make that seem unimportant. I think it's, for reasons I could explain, and I gave a talk here, it's of maximum importance that if we understand empowerment processes, we're going to have to understand them one human being at a time, and one couple at a time, and one family at a time, and one neighborhood at a time, and one community at a time. It's so different, the kind of science we need, that we need all hands on deck, as we say in English, a nautical term. And I think because the way big science has evolved, it's almost impossible to play that game in lower and middle income countries. You simply cannot get the money to do these gold-plated, gigantic, very expensive studies. It's not what's needed. What's needed is on the ground, person by person, couple by couple, family by family, community by community. And so I'm here to also ask for your help.
Of course.
Not just to offer, but to request. Because what you have, if you can harness it, is what the world needs. And so I welcome the opportunity to talk again to Alamak, and maybe in a small way to talk here to the larger community here in Santa Cruz. And I hope it's a message that empowers your journey as scientists and as an intellectual community and university trying to serve. I understand the history of your university a little bit here, and that was the purpose of those who gave the money to create the university, was it not? So maybe this is a good thing to conclude on.
Amazing. Thank you very much.